I hope you guys do that.
Did everyone get a ticket? Okay, we need one here.
Yes. You guys get a raffle ticket?
Yes, we did.
All right.
I know, but it's still a lot of sex.
Yeah. So she's like really nice. She knew.
You all have raffle tickets? Everyone has a ticket?
Yeah, it was my whole little world. I was.
I think we're good. Hi everyone, my name is Crystal, and this is Carlos, also known as Charlie, and we have a couple of other important people here from the LAUX group. We have Chris Chandler right here, and we have Jason, who is doing live streaming and everything on YouTube.
Google Plus. Nobody's watching us.
And then we have Nick, who's actually doing the filming, so really high quality. And we have Marcelo, who's also been helping out, and a couple of the volunteers here. And we have a nice group of people from Disney. All the Disney people stand up. And we're also doing a drawing this evening, so you may have hopefully a ticket. And we'll talk a little bit about more what we're doing. This is tonight's agenda. So we already finished the food and beverage part, and then we'll soon be moving into Dan's presentation. And also now, if somebody from Disney would like to speak, we'll skip that part. And also, we want to open up the floor in just a minute to anybody who has any UX and job openings, those kinds of things. And then we'll have the event and we'll have Q&A after the event with them. In case you want to log in, here's the password and that kind of information. These are our hashtags for today. Most important thing is Dan's here. Okay. His name is spelled wrongly. Okay.
His Twitter handle is okay.
His Twitter handle is okay. That's what counts. And so tonight's event, we're going to be discussing, or Dan will be discussing, I'm sorry, what good means in the Performance Continuum. Actually, we have a large number of people here from TUG, which is the organization that Dan runs. So if you guys wouldn't mind standing up for a second, I'm really excited that you're all here. And Jessica, thank you, Bob, so we did want to say thank you to Disney for providing the food, which is not cheap, and also the wonderful location that we have this evening. And so I'm going to go into some important events that are coming up. We have, maybe some of you know Elaine Bailey. She's doing a workshop coming up this Saturday. It's going to be an awesome workshop on LAUX. So if you do have the opportunity to attend, I highly recommend it. And then we have another LAUX event going on in the community. So this one we have Clever Dog on the 17th. It's only $11 to attend. And this is probably the most important thing that's coming up. Jessica, who's here in the audience, who works with Dan at TUG, is going to be doing a 2-day weekend workshop, and that is what we're going to be giving away at the end of the evening. Yay, Jessica. Oops. Oh, no, that's enough communication. That's also a past event. So there are going to be 2 workshops coming up with Eric Wright. Disability runs on writing for interactive media. And that's coming up in October 13th and 14th over the weekend in Next Space, which is in Culver City. And then we're also in the community, there is a usability camp going on at Cal State Northridge. I think some of you went to the event where they had the blind developers at Yahoo. And it was a very impressive event. Unfortunately, I was out of town. This is going to be run by the same people, so it should be an amazing event. So if you can go, I believe it's free, and I highly recommend it. And then again, this is what we're doing at the end of the evening. Okay. So on that note, I'm going to hand it over to Chris to introduce Dan, and then we'll move on to Dan's presentation. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, I'm so excited to see how much stuff is going on in this community. Again, I think Southern California is really going crazy with UX. So I don't have a lot to say about Dan Klyn. A couple people approached me and emailed me today and said, "Tell me why I should go all the way out there to see this guy." And so I'll give you the spiel that I gave them. And by the way, they're all here tonight. So the spiel works. I said, first of all, he teaches in Michigan, an awesome school. The place where I believe was sort of born. The Polar Bear book was born anyway. He's a devotee of Richard Saul Werner, the guy who first used the term information architecture, who is truly an inspiration. And Dan is actually maybe obsessed, might even be a better word for that. So he's quite knowledgeable. He I think, as you'll hear, he takes the architecture part of information architecture extremely seriously. He is also a incredibly swell guy at a party. I got to meet him at the IA Summit.
Yeah.
And we spent the day together at Disneyland on Monday and had an awesome time along with his son Garrett, who turned 10 today, so happy birthday. And when I asked Garrett if there was anything he wanted to say about his father, he had two things to say. I hope you don't mind if I share it, Garrett. You did. You said both. Do you want to say them? Come on up.
Frankly, speaking of jokes like that, the only thing I said to him, to Chris, was, my dad loves to make puns whenever. If there was if the city was exploding, he would just be standing there saying, "I know there's a pun here."
Woo! Happy birthday!
The other thing you said, Garrett, that I hope it gets tweeted, is that Dan is slap happy in the morning. I'm not 100% sure what that means, but Dan did not deny it. Yeah, I get it. So I'm really excited. I'm going to tell you something. I did not look at this presentation, the slides that were sent out. The last time he was seconds to tell me about this concept, and I totally wasn't buying it. I didn't buy it. But I thought he was a longer form and actually talk about what he meant. That's enough of me. Well, without further ado, I'd like to get Dan up here. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Chris and Garrett, for your generous and somewhat truthful in Chris's case, entirely truthful in Garrett's case, introduction of me. Let's see. So I'm from Grand Rapids, Michigan, which you, I'm sure, will recognize as the epicenter of progressive culture. Come on now. Yes, and as Chris mentioned, I also have the great pleasure of teaching information architecture at the University of Michigan School of Information, which is one of the places where information architecture was born. And the reason that I'm leaving tomorrow is because I need to be in class at 1 o'clock on Friday. So I wish I could have stayed longer this time, but I have to go. And I also have the honor and the privilege of being a director of the Professional Organization for Information Architecture. And if any of the things that you hear from me tonight are interesting to you, this is probably the best next step for you to take, is to check out the IA Institute, consider becoming a member. We compared our membership dues with, I believe it's the Gerbil and Hamster Enthusiasts Association, and we are half the price of what they is. For $40 for individuals, $20 for students, you can join with the global community of information architects. Probably the best reason to join the Institute for your dollar value is a fantastic mentoring program, and many of us have benefited from being mentored by people who have been doing this for a long time. So definitely check out the IA Institute if any of this interests you. It interested me to the point where I needed to start a company in order to do these things. My partner Bob is here with us tonight also. About a year and a half ago, we looked at what we might do, what we could do, and we noted a void in the sort of the community of practice of a group of people who come together to focus on information architecture, and not in a instead of UX or instead of IXD. There's been some acrimony and some confusion over the labels, and so we thought that by creating a company that focused on IA, it would help us explain this thing that we're passionate about, and that's what I'm going to be doing for you tonight. I've worked with a number of clients, sort of household names, if you will, and especially earlier on in my practice, in the middle aughts, if you will. If you were to ask any of these clients who were working with me, the business card says information architect. If you were to circle back to them and say, what is information architecture? They probably wouldn't be able to give you a simple answer. It hasn't been explained well, and I'm certainly one of the people who haven't been explaining it well. In the past, at least, I'm trying to do a better job of it now. If you ask Siri, she doesn't really know what to do with information architecture, at least not yet. So the place that most people learned about information architecture, as Chris mentioned, was this book that we call the Polar Bear book. It started in 1998. It was Amazon.com's computer book of the year, which is fun. And in successive editions, it has grown in size. So it goes from a slim volume to a fatter one to an even fatter volume in 2006. Its authors were both librarians from the University of Michigan, and at the time when the web was exploding in the sort of the turn of the past century, in the late 90s, these librarians in Ann Arbor decided that the things that they knew as librarians could be quite valuable with this new technology we were all figuring out called the World Wide Web. And so this was the place to learn about information architecture. And what you'll note, if you were to look at the successive editions of the Polar Bear book, is the definition of information architecture. The way that it was explained started out complicated and then got increasingly complicated. So we have three different sort of definitions of information architecture in the first two books, and then the final edition, Peter and Luke both said that they don't plan to make another edition of the book. There are four definitions of it in the third and final edition. So no wonder we haven't had an easy time of sort of nailing it down to what is this thing. It's a lot of things to a lot of people. Recently, Peter Morville encapsulated a lot of his thinking about information architecture in a Prezi called Understanding Information Architecture. And one of the things that he did in that presentation was to distill down sort of the Polar Bear way of explaining information architecture. And I was interested to see that the way that he said it was sort of landing on this idea of it's a structural design practice or a structural design approach. And in the academic world, where we're trying to make sense of this for students who come from human-computer interaction, information science, library science backgrounds, information architecture has been placed inside of a framework that's called design, user experience design. And if you look at the sister disciplines underneath this overarching construct of user experience design, one pattern that you can note, my fondness for puns, I think, is based on a fondness for seeing patterns. And one of the patterns that you can see here is design, 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 design. And then this sore thumb that sticks out called architecture. So one of the things that I hope to do is make it easier for all of us to talk about design and architecture more effectively, more clearly. And if you will indulge a metaphor for the difference between architecture and design, this will help me situate you for the rest of my talk. The way that I like to think about it is, well, it's one really simple way to think about it is the product or service that you're working on. If it were a piece of cloth, a continuous sort of canvas, if you will, architecture is an analytical process to figure out where the cuts go. So architecture architects being the ones who are operating the scissors. And there's that sort of time-worn adage, measure twice, cut once. That, if you allow me to boil it down to something that simple, that's, to me, and as we've been working as information architects, that's how we differentiate between architecture and design. Architects use an analytical process to figure out what the parts are, the defining of what the architect Dan Klyn sort of talked about. There's a society among the rooms in a building. As architects, when we are looking at a product or a service and trying to figure out where the, again, the metaphorical cuts go, it's about creating a society among the parts and the relationship among the parts and how they should relate to one another. Once that work of architecture is done, once the cuts have been made, designers then can work with each of the parts to make the parts be the best parts they can be. The process of design is a process of synthesis, taking all of the things that we've learned in the process of framing the problems to then go and solve the problems. And there really is a relationship between architecture and design where once the cuts have been made, once the designers are then working with the parts to make them be the best parts they can be, oftentimes a designer will identify a flaw in the architecture. Almost all of us do design, and maybe like me, you've run into situations where you're working with a part of the system, and you're trying to make that part be the best part it can be, and you hit a limit, you hit a wall, if you will. You can't make the design work well because actually the cut has been put in the wrong place. And at that point, design and architecture have to come back together. Perhaps if we separated the cloth into 3 parts, maybe the designers who are working with those parts have figured out in that problem-solving process of synthesis, you know what, we need to sew these parts back together and cut them together. So not an antipathy, but rather a sort of a Mobius strip-like relationship between architecture and design, and you have to make the cuts first before you know what the parts are. So as we think about it at TUG, architecture comes first, and then design happens, and then we kind of iterate together from there. Another way that you could say this is architecture is because of reasons. Why are the cuts in the places that they are? If you'll indulge a metaphor from architecture, an example from architecture, has anybody here been to Fort Worth, Texas, to the Kimball Museum? There's a couple of us. Okay, guys. This is a phenomenal building. This is a magnificent work of architecture. It is comprised of, and here's a picture of it. So back to that idea of the architect as the one who's figuring out what the parts are. Why is it five parts and then a 6th empty part on the end? The why and the what of the design or of the architecture of the Kimball Museum is based on a society of parts. Why these parts? Where are the divisions between the pieces of the building? And sometimes the reasons are not functional. There's very little functional benefit to this sort of extra shape at the end of the building, but it creates all this delight because Fort Worth is a relentlessly sunny place. This creates a lovely outdoor space of shade. It's right next to the pool. So the decision to make the parts, that was Tom being an architect. Inside of the Kimball, there is a remarkable feature, which is a slit down the sort of the top of the vaulted ceilings of these forms. That was created in order to let that endless amount of Texas bright sunlight enter the building and to light the galleries in a way that would create this marvelous way to illuminate all of the artworks. So architecture was deciding what are the parts, and then design is making those parts be the best part they can be. Architecture was there should be a slit in the roof to let the light in, but then Here's an image from the movie My Architect, which is on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it. This is Lucan at the building site. And there's a wonderful sequence where the engineers are snickering to themselves, like, what is he doing here? The architecture was done. Why is he still here pointing at stuff, telling us how to do things? Well, that was design. In order to make the execution of that idea for the slit in the roofs to really make the light spread the way that it needed to be spread, that was making the parts be the best parts. That was figuring out, solving a problem. And so this man that I'm obsessed with, Richard Saul-Wurman, when I started digging into his work, I was startled by the way that he characterized the difference between architecture and design. The way that... Can you hear me okay if I don't use this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The way that he differentiated between architecture and design, for Mr. Wurman, architecture is what? What are the parts? What are we going to do? And design is how. And for Mr. Wurman, the way that he would talk about it is there are many kinds of how, but only one what. And that distinction has also been helpful as we've been trying to figure out how to explain the differences between architecture and design, back to this idea of the Mobius strip. There are clearly surfaces inside and outside, and then there are these parts where it's hard to tell which is which. So the relationship between architecture and design, there are parts of that process that are clearly architecture, other parts that are clearly design, and then we come together at the edges in these strange places. Back in 1997, so remembering back to those polar bear books, in 1998, a book called Information Architecture for the World Wide Web was published by O'Reilly, Computer Book of the Year, ends up framing the practice for many of us who do this work. In fact, there was another book about information architecture that was published the year before by this man, Richard Saul-Wurman. You probably know him as, or at least you probably heard of his TED. He invented that conference, and that's what he's mostly known for. But he also invented the idea of information architecture. Back in 1976, when he was practicing as an architect, he was the national chairman of the American Institute of Architects. And this is a program from that conference that he led called the Architecture. And so, in my work in information architecture, starting with, and actually I've had the benefit of being mentored by people, starting with information architecture for the World Wide Web, engaging with that in terms of librarianship, I started to find limitations. I started to put those walls as a designer of, hey, I'm just not making this be the best part it can be. And by going backward to understanding information architecture, in addition to understanding it as a kind of librarianship, through the polar bear book, the more I dug into this research into the way that architects, or at least this one architect, talked about information architecture, and emphasizing the architecture piece as quite illuminating. And I think the contrast between the definitions of information architecture that we see in the polar bear book, and then this definition of information architecture that Mr. Wurman sort of shook out of his sleeve in an anonymously voiced interview for Think magazine in 1997. When I read this, this is when it all started to sort of come together for me. Like, okay, this is something that I would like to do. It's an information architecture. This graphics, it's about how to choose the right way to present information. It's a whole way of life in which the game is not to make something look good, but something deep. And so, what I would like to show you is a tool for doing that architecture, for focusing on, are there ways that we can look at this, not from a surface standpoint, not from an aesthetic standpoint, but from an architecture standpoint, back in the 70s and in the 60s, Mr. Wurman was practicing architecture. This is a picture of 4 beach houses that he designed for a set of clients. 4 families who owned pretty small pieces of real estate on an island made of sand that's about an hour and a half from the city, from Long Beach now. And we call them sandcastles. And I find them to be breathtaking. They're magical. They're sandcastles. And I love them. And so I had to go visit them. So there's me beholding what's left. There were 4 of them. Only one of them still stands. And it's been modified. And hasn't been taken care of all that well. And that was pretty sad. But even sadder piece for me was what they built in the place of the old creek. And before we get on our high horses and say, clearly this compared to this, if we want to talk about what's good, what is good architecture, I want to go here, right? Who would like to go here to say what is the good architecture? Some of us at least. Compared with this. But in order to make that assessment, you would have to talk about what are you trying to do. So back to what Mr. Williams said about only one what, but lots of how. You would have to go back to the what. If the way that you want to live, if the way you want that experience to come together is about it, you want that to be of the beach, then clearly the structures that you originally designed are the good ones. But what if the people who live there, they want to live like they live in town? They want to enjoy the proximity to the beach, but they want the space and the way that they live to be more part of their town. If this was if this is what's true about the climate, about how they want to live, then that monstrosity, that how could they live, is actually the better architecture. So in that instance, what does vision? It all goes back to architecture is because of reasons. And the reason of the town, I will argue that what's there now, if that's the reason, that's the why and the what for the client, and that ugly monstrosity. So it gets down to this. In order to know what's good, we have to establish what's true. I'm not talking about some platitudinal sort of universal virtue of good. In this context, on this piece of property, on this island made of sand, with these clients, if we can establish what's true for them, then we can make that structure. So some examples of this from our work, from working on digital products and services, the difference between architecture and design. Here's was a $2 billion, $1 billion valuation of Facebook stock. It's changed that a bit, but in any case, Instagram. Who here was not in iOS using Instagram? Frustrated by all these people who use images, and there's nothing else. You couldn't access their profile, you couldn't see other pictures in the screen. When this product and service came out, those of us who weren't using the devices that we now have a very good sense of the value of it or what it was about. And if you would examine the website, the initial website for Instagram didn't do anything. There wasn't anything there. It's either install the app, and I think I made this screenshot on the day that it launched for Android, but it was for iOS. And then as far as what you can do on the web, the only feature that they exposed to the web at that point was changing your lost your phone. The website provided the ability for you to change your username password so that the account is still the account instead of your Instagram. So that choice that they made. So was it good or bad that we were not iOS users? rely on the what, then the decision that they made was a good decision. Even though I had a poor experience because I'm not on that platform, in their context, that architect. So I would like to show you a tool that me and my colleagues at Club have developed to help define this thing of establishing what's true. If you can figure out sort of a baseline of what's true for some scientific product industries that we're working on, then we can make it easier. So it's sort of a tool how to figure out what the pieces of what the society is. This emerged, so we're a young company, we're about a year and a half old. One of our early client engagements was with a client that I will refer to as publishing. Of course, under women. Like many companies in publishing, in print publishing context, they were in a pretty uncomfortable place. Profound changes to their business model. They had a print product, they were transitioning to digital product. The market was changing, the business model was changing. They had stakeholders who had put in 20 or more years on printing, and also had new stakeholders, folks. They had an ambitious software development schedule. Originally, when I was explaining this, I first used the word heroic to describe the software development schedule, and I realized, no, the schedule was just crazy. And the developers were for assenting to develop that many features. That really needed to be all. And so we have this first sort of major deliverable bringing them together and aligning them around what kind of information architecture that companies are getting for. That's a roadmap for the product and service development. And so the way that we intended to do this was, okay, well, we did a heuristic assessment for the review of information architecture. We use that to sort of align it out. That would be great. We can do a walkthrough of the analytics, sort of talk about what's true and factual about the product and service. And then the question was, with this mixed group of stakeholders, and with this weird publishing context, how do we do that? How do we report on the goals and priorities that we observe? And all of that eventually leads to the roadmap. All of that. And in 1973, 40 years ago, in a book called The Nature of Recreation, this was one of the architectural projects, including parks and public spaces. He wrote a book called The Nature of Recreation. This book is one of the first places where he introduced an idea called performance. And if you allow me to explain through that idea about this concept of performance is, then I can show you this tool that helps you find performance. So what Mr. Wilson said in 1972 was that a common obstacle to understanding and communicating our people, to realizing solutions to them, is that habit of asking for a specific product we need to see, even if it's failure, rather than analyzing them. So performance is the measure of how well our environment responds to them, and the basis of the common vocabulary that we communicate. And reading this is what we needed for publishing. We needed a way to measure how well the product and service responded to the customer's needs and the business needs. And then could we use that as a common vocabulary for talking about it? And so the tool that emerged from this work 40 years ago for performance, this idea of we have this common vocabulary for talking about the blind and what, and then Mr. Woman's observation that continuums are the best way to frame that products and services that we work on. In this case, we build it into a number of to allow for either this or easy, clear, binary. It's more encompassing. That's a really effective to go about. It's another way that we said it later on in the behavior was performance is the art that function. Not just does it do the function, but is there something better than it? We can define the nature of the performance we allow, and we can develop a language to talk about it, and we'll be effective. So to apply this tool in the context of the sandcastle building, rather than saying it's either a sandcastle or a monstrosity, what if we have the ability to engage that question? What if we wanted it to be more of the beach than of the town, but not go all the way to the literal sort of magical sandcastle? Would it be great if we could say, it's sort of one, it's a one, between 1 and 2 towards the direction. Back to that idea of before we can know what's really established what's true, rather than saying, well, we're going to make something that's a beach or a town, this is a more serviceable kind of truth. This is a more precise kind of truth for our group. Here's another project that Mr. Warner worked on. This is a private home in Philadelphia that was used by a doctor. And what he wanted to do was integrate space for his doctor practice with how he's living. And back to that question of, in order to know truly if this project is true, should this be a sort of continuous statement? Or should those spaces where the doctoring happens, the living in the family happens, should those be separate? And we talk about this not just either or, but in terms of degree. And as you watch the development of the way that the structure is designed over 7 or so years that the design developed, it moved around. It moved around on this continuum. Sometimes it was coming more towards other times more towards spaces where I'm landing in the bucket. I'd say it's probably a 3 in maybe the two spaces, the place where the practice and the practice separated out space. I believe that here is where the practice and over here. And for clients, they were completely filled with this one. It's on the market right now. It's about $700,000. You can do like the purchases of the birthday present. So using this as a tool, saying we're using this in public info and saying, can we talk about what we ought to do we wanted to both represent what we heard, and then we also wanted to use the same tool to give us the direction for where we go. And so what we provided to the client was an indication of this is where they can go now, and then gathered from them what they thought they should do, and then represented that in a different color. And so in the same continuum, we can both understand the nature of the performance that we have now, and then aspirationally, what is the nature of the performance that we get? And then using this with the client, because we had a mixed group of stakeholders, what we chose to do, and I'll get this a little bit, a couple slides ahead of you, we distributed worksheets, and we asked the clients to indicate that aspirational state of where they would like to go. And we collected their names, but because of the politics of the way that this company works, we actually presented the results of these surveys without identifying whose answers were. And so for this client, some of the continuums we constructed were quite actionable and powerful. Should our priority be on, and this one applies in many contexts that we do in a sense, if we were to characterize the nature of the performance we want out of this website or out of this app, to what degree is it about acquiring new customers relative to servicing the ones that we already have? If they were to say it needs to be right in the middle, zero, the way that we started to use this tool is we would say no. We can't do anything with that. That puts it back to that sort of either or, it has to be equally. You can't work with that. So if you do vote for zero, you have to then scribble on one of the ends, show us if it was going to tip in a certain direction, which direction is it going? Because with that direction, if we can establish what's true about what they get back, what are we doing? It can't just be acquired, and it can't just be serviced. The business will work. So to what degree do we balance these seemingly irreconcilable forces of acquiring and servicing customers? Another one that is pretty evergreen for us so far in our work is, does the way that we execute the architecture, so we've got our scissors up, we've got the cloth, is this about specific sequences that we need people to follow? So in an e-commerce context or in a lead gen context, specific sequences are what's good. Over at the other end of this continuum is a fun word from Peter Marco, intertwingularity. We could create an interlinking pattern among all of these pieces that unlocks all manner of serendipitous and odd and intertwinable functions. For some experiences, that's good. For other experiences and products, that's good. Instead of being in this either or mode, can you express this in continuums? Publishing code, huge. The budgetary implications of this continuum, the employee morale implications of this continuum, are we going to keep adding new features every month? We're not growing our staff and not growing the support behind it, or should we be optimizing? Again, this was for an IA roadmap, so how should we be framing the work that we're going to do going forward? If we were going to keep adding features and say, if we're at 5 for adding features, then we can, that's a different set of activities than if we were focusing on features. Rather than saying pick one, what we can say is, where should we go? What's the nature of the performance we want out of this? This one. So with publishing code, we anonymized feedback, and then we indicated both where we think they are now. So for publishing code, when we talk about key performance indicators, or sort of measures of how successful the products and services are, our assessment, our analysis of where they were at when we found them was, it was all about engagement, all about time on page, number of pages viewed, that sort of thing. Many of us have a background in e-commerce, and the KPIs that we like to think of are more in terms of conversion. So not how much time do they spend on the page, but did they click on the things that we want to click? And then even further, with advertisers who's taking the customer off-site, we close the loop to know how effective did they convert on the advertiser side and they click on the ad on publishing page side. The degree to which we were going to measure our efforts, if we didn't establish this truth, if they wanted to be thinking in terms of engagement and we wanted to be thinking in terms of conversion, does it have to be us versus them? Or could we make an assessment and then see what sort of an average of all of the staff, where they think they should? And what's fascinating about this execution, our decision to anonymize the results, this is the most powerful person in the room, way over on the side. And there she is again. But for us to have said, this is the most powerful person in the room, that is a different way to use this tool of establishing what's true than anonymizing it, and then using, this is actually Bob's idea, adapting from Mr. Tuffy this idea of spark lines. So if we can show the distribution of what your staff, and then understand that it isn't unanimous, that's a rich kind of truth that the stakeholder can own, and that more importantly to us, that we can know that what we're doing. That's what this all boils down to is. We'd love to be able to say, yeah, we did it right. We're going to make it friendly to search engines. We're going to make it friendly to people. And you can't just make a site for search engines, and if you don't care about the search engines, the business is going to fail. But so where should we be? Where should we go? We knew that the most powerful person in the organization was not aligned with everyone else. But by anonymizing it, we were able to then workshop this with them in a way where I'm not sure that she always knew or remembered even what her votes were. But it became an effective way for us to talk about what could we do, what should we do, and where is the distribution of intent on the phone. Most important person in the organization, second most important person in the organization, everyone else. And then some of the more future looking folks saying, no, we need a robust mobile solution now. Before you know what's good, you have to establish what's true. The truth here was there wasn't alignment from the leaders. So in the time since we engaged with the Publishing Co., the Publishing Co. story doesn't end happily. After working through this exercise of establishing what's true, the truth was unpopular, and we didn't do any further work following the establishment of the truth. Perhaps we established too much. But in any case, we probably protected ourselves from entering into an engagement where we would be pursuing what we thought was true. And most of the people we were interacting with thought that was true. But when it comes time to approving our invoice, the outlier, the most important person in the room, well, that's not true for me. And what you did isn't good. So that story didn't end well, but the happy ending is coming up with this approach, and then we continue to adapt it. And in every case, in every engagement we've used it since then, the engagement has continued, and the work that has followed has been successful because we know what didn't. And then we're also starting to adapt this in terms of not only can we show through the statistical distribution, we can use the spark lines, and we even thought of maybe there would be a way to do a weighted rendition of this where the most important person's block causes the scale to tip. We're fascinated by it. We can continue to adapt this tool. So some quick tips for how you might use these. One thing that we've learned is that grammatical symmetry at either side of the continuum helps everybody understand them. So if it's a noun on the left, it should probably be a noun. If it's not on the left, it should not be. These don't necessarily have to be opposites. The beauty of the continuum is it isn't a zero-sum game. And so when you construct these continuums, sometimes they're opposites. Intertwingularity is the opposite of sequence. But of the region of the town, those are not diametrically opposed. Especially if you live in Venice, of the region of the town. So they're not necessarily opposites. As I mentioned earlier, 0 is okay, but only with direction. So if it lands on 0, we can do far less with that than if we can find at least what direction we can. And then this idea of adding spark lines on top of the event to indicate the weight and distribution of intention, the opinion of the stakeholders. And then I placed it last here, but getting started with this tool, one way that you can get started with it is, and again, to the covering one's ass would be the aspect of this tool. Start voicing the objections someone might have to your architecture design work in terms of this thing is too, because again, continuums speak to range. So if we were to say, it's too pink, it's too blue, it's too social, it's too gimmicky, it's too, that's one way to start figuring out what these sort of is flipping it around and thinking of this future objection that we might be able to and then thinking, well, what would be a continuum I could use to manage that? If I could get the client to indicate, in terms of this sort of imagined objective or objection, where should it be? Then that would be great. You can preempt the objection. In the built environment, in architecture, like in this wonderful building here, the first part of the project, and in architecture, again, we're talking about performance, that's a weird word, it means different things in different contexts. Programming, most of our work, we can't call it that, but in architecture. Programming is the first part of the project, for the line of the life. The most compelling cost saving in the building environment comes in this programming phase. We can take things out of the program, the rest of the project can cost it. So using a tool like the Performance Continuums at the very front of the engagement to say, to get a more actionable version of what we should be doing, ends up being a really great way to save costs before you even go into sort of exploring all of the things that you do. Establishing the nature of the performance environment. Another thing that Jerome said was happy limitations. Creating these continuums at this point in the process, those are happy limitations that will help us reduce cost and then to know that we're working towards ideally. If you are interested in this, there is a page on our website with a OmniGraffle template that you can use to start making these continuums yourself, and then a copy of the presentation is there also. So I would like to hear questions or objections or concerns that you might have about this group.
Yes. How well does the like the goals that you set for your clients and the reality, how closely align that?
Well, presumably, after we do this, after we figure out what the continuum should be, we align with the client to say where we should go. And then Jesse and I sat down yesterday to start doing the structural design for this project. Going back to these continuums, because we had an agreement among our stakeholders for, this is the nature of what we would like you to make for us. And we had probably 6 or 7 continuums for the internet side of the project, 6 or 7 for the web side of the project, and then 5 or 6 for up above everything. After Jesse and I sort of had our Sharpie jam section to figure out how we should structure this, we then went back to the continuum ourselves to course build. With all of the stuff we did in the last hour, was that the right stuff? Are we doing it right? Well, let's go through every little indication that we made plan for how we do architecture. How well does it abide by what we said we would do with all these continuums? So we found them to be quite robust. And when clients have questions about, well, this feature, why don't you express it like this? We can pin it back to, well, these are these 3 continuums that speak to the kind of performance you want and that. So it helps us map the reasons to the what we're that is your question.
All right. So I'm just wondering, our goals could change all the time.
Yes.
And like the market could switch, like maybe everyone just started using telemetry all of a sudden, so
yes.
mobile is out.
Yes.
So
when that happens, when you're working with a client and a curveball is thrown, so Jorge and I were talking earlier about a project where the agency, the design agency, the advertising agency for the client, changes 3/4 of the way through a project, the original agency and the client and the architect they know what they're doing. And then the new agency comes in and makes recommendations that upends all of that upfront planning. Rather than entering into an argument at that point, we would go back to the continuum and say, hey, this curveball that your agency just threw, great. It means that we have to recalibrate. We always reset. We have to go back to these, right, because the architecture is based on these performance continuums. If a curveball is thrown that changes the nature of what the client wants to do, then we just map it back to the continuums. And we show them how it's moving, rather than saying, well, your agency is saying X, we told you Y, so you have to choose Y. The conversation is more about, no, you establish who you. And this new thing is a new different reason. So let's recalibrate these 4 continuums, and then we'll refactor the architecture accordingly. And where before the curveball, we knew what we were doing was good because it's what we were with our performance continuum, we'll just update the continuums and refactor it, and we still know what we need. Or if we're lucky, when the client sees how much movement they wanted to do, would have to happen if we adopted it. Then when they see a clear expression of what their intent was earlier, that can sometimes help them like, okay, I'll tell you. Is there any way to increase the velocity, like, like setting goals? That's a good question. I would like to think about that and sort of about. But I don't think so. I think it's, I'm sorry. Does anybody else have a question? Yeah. Yeah. Yes, the printer behind us. Is it one?
Yeah, it's kind of.
Okay.
It's great right now. The discovery process in your produce matter, I gather it's like all in one room, all at the same time, or is it one-on-one?
One-on-one.
And was it questionnaire or open?
We have a framework that we use for stakeholder interviews. So we had a pretty tight set of questions and approaches that we wanted to go through, but we adapted it with each of the stakeholders. And we absolutely knew that we had to segregate them. If that most important person in the company were in the room, we were establishing what's true, her employees would look to her for the direction.
What if you establish your case, when they did the exercise today, that was
Yes, it was. So the only time that we brought it back together was sort of in that alignment session. So we gathered the facts and we with each of the stakeholders, processed the data, made the decision that we have to anonymize this, and it's going to be a political task, and then brought them all into a room together and said, okay, this is what we think is true. And then this is what you all said you want to be true for the future stuff you do.
One more. A lot of data points or just do that?
How do you mean, like the number of continuums or
Your framework to the questions.
There's probably, I think there are 5 categories of questions in the framework, and probably 10 individual questions inside of each of those groupings. So it's at least an hour. Long hour. We're back, yes.
Yeah, you said in your follow-up with 0 is okay, but you can skip a reading direction.
Yes.
So what is keeping that 0?
That's a great question. I think that probably it's to make it possible for there to be both things at the same time, for it both to be an acknowledgement that the truth, so acquire versus service, one of those types of continuums, the organization could say, we are not willing to see an expression of what's coming out of your work that is noticeably or sort of meaningfully going in one or the other direction. So that little piece of signal that we get from you saying, okay, it doesn't have a number, but it's just sort of in the middle and hanging. My sense is that it might be a gesture for making the activity a little more humane. To not force, you're forcing a direction without forcing a direction. Maybe it's a trick. Yes?
Anyway, so how do you determine that even is for your require service?
Yep.
You guys have it?
Yes. So in the case of publishing code, it was 7 or 8 interviews with business line owners within the organization, and then looking at the web analytics, and then doing a heuristic analysis with an expert review. The process of that sort of triangulates to then, at this time, reviewing and Abby Covert sitting down and saying, okay, what are the key dimensions of what we need to establish here? And so that triangulation process helps us derive them. But what came to me after the initial discussion with the publishing code was that idea you previously thought about, well, maybe you could pose it as an objection. But before you design structure, architect structure, what if the client were to say it's too this, or it wasn't enough that? For myself, that's been one of my starting point now. Trying to think forward. And in that interview process, you hear oftentimes when people are using language, when you're talking with them, that speaks to degree, I start looking for that now. So if somebody says, yeah, it was too something, then that's automatically kind of a candidate for continuous. To what degree do we want us to be this?
Dan, I want to jump in with 2 points. I've been working with Dan on a lot of these things. To your point about where they come from, a lot of times as I'm a mid-level IA, so a lot of times when I'm going through these projects, I have a lot of questions. And for me, I come up with pages and pages of questions. A lot of times I'm categorizing my questions. I need to ask the developer, I need to ask the design team, I need to ask the project manager. A lot of times my continuums are coming out of these questions. Because, oh, I heard the VP of marketing say this, but I heard the VP of communications say this. So I'm just going to put this on a continuum and let them kind of duke it out in the room. Second point I wanted to make with the gentleman in the orange shirt's question about the context of the way this activity happens. It's less about it happens all together or it happens separately. We respond to the culture of the client that we're working with, and we kind of let them take the lead. If we get the sense that they are very focused on consensus, it might be something that we do together and are very transparent. Whereas if we get the sense that there's a lot of acrimonious interactions, we do it more behind.
Yes.
Have you used this model not just with internal stakeholders, but with your client audience as well? I mean, is there ever a case where it comes in and you have your clients saying you want to come to their audience together?
I can't wait until we have an engagement with them. We have not yet done it, but for us, we start with business business objectives, and business objections. So no, we haven't tried to reconcile what these things mean in terms of what's true for the client, and then using the same tool with end users or expected end users. But got my eyes to it. And the graphical template is there, and based on, I mean, this is not rocket surgery, this is pretty simple stuff. I would love you to be us. Is that fantastic? Yes.
So it seems like the continuum is another way of just taking a vote amongst the stakeholders. Is there a part in your process where you couple these results with competitive analysis, like as an opportunity for your firm to inject your own opinion about whether or not they're taking the right approach?
We haven't done that yet. We've tried to use it in terms of, we can use it. So on one of the continuums, the blue indicated what our expert assessment of our analysis says this is where you're at, and then compare that with what the client says that they're at. But no, we haven't used them that way yet. But much suggestion over here that's better. Are there any objections? I haven't heard anything that sounds like an objection yet. Is this an objection?
It is.
Excellent.
Well, I don't know if you have that, but one of the things that we discovered when trying to bring this idea of a continuum into our process was that the internal team had a really difficult time, first of all, deciding the two sides of the scale and what they should be, because they seem to want to force them to be opposites. And then the second really challenging thing that I'd like to get your advice on is how do you get consensus on the baseline? Because we had in our own team differing opinions on where the baseline should be. Where do we start, and how can we get to an agreement on where we are?
I think that this tool might lend itself better to outsider consulting than it does to internal team. So if I understand the question correctly, when you say baseline, you mean sort of where are we at now?
Right.
And how do we get agreement on that?
Right.
We, as the internal members of the organization, are probably too close to it to be able to do that effectively. And so establishing where you want to go as an internal team, that's probably easier than the baseline piece. And so one way that you can use this tool perhaps would be to bring people who don't, and maybe it's still inside the organization, but it's not the people who are so close to it, and have an outside perspective on the where we are now, and then an internal perspective on where we should go. But I think your experience with this, that it's internally, and again, if you didn't anonymize this, if you are in a room in real time with your team, the people whose work has resulted more in how it is now have more to lose. So we're doing it wrong. Because I'm mostly responsible for where we're at with this one. And I think we're at 9 in the direction we know we want to go, and you all are saying 4 in the direction we don't want to go. So we're identifying who did it wrong. That's hard.
But to that point, when we were sitting there, we worked on, we had to establish a baseline for a pretty big project recently together, and we all had to do homework. And then I'm talking about us as an external, as a consultancy, looking at a client's thing. We sat together, we did our homework beforehand. We mathematically crunched out our numbers and said, okay, we're at an average of 3, you're the outlier. Why? Explain yourself. And we had to be accountable as an internal team, establishing this baseline, so we knew when we went to the client, we could stand behind what we were saying, and that we were all in alignment as the IU team.
Well, thank you very much for your attention. This is top secret, but the Midwest UX conference, which has traditionally been in Ohio, is going to be in Grand Rapids, Michigan next September. So if you would like to get a taste of it, as well as pulling the sugar on move, you can come to the Midwest UX conference in September next year. Experience our hospitality in Grand Rapids.
And I'm so excited that you and supposed to be talking to you. And your son is I actually want to have you come up and help me with this. We are going to be doing a drawing to win the workshop with Jessica. Now, there are a couple of requirements about winning this workshop. First of all, you need to be available on the dates of the workshop. We'll pull a couple of tickets. That way we have backup. If someone comes up, you win, and you're not able to.
Does everybody that's been interested in being in the campus have a chance to participate? Yeah. It's a lean, unmoderated user testing workshop. going to be held down at Cover Dog on September 22nd and 23rd. It's 4 hours each day from noon to 4, so Saturday and Sunday. So if you're not available that day and your ticket gets sold, or if you're not interested, please let somebody else grab it. The workshop's going to be going over, if you're familiar about beta testing or not, doesn't matter. Workshop's going to be going over how do you set up unmoderated user tests, how do you write the tests, and then once you run the test, how do you analyze the data and come up with actionable findings. So it's going to be a great course. It's going to be very intense. You do not have to be an expert in user testing to show up. You're all interested in coming to what have you.
So I think we're going to take and then we will select a couple of tickets and find out who are lucky winners. And thank you. I'm so happy you're here on the and I think you have to read off the last 3 numbers. So what do we have here? 684. 684. All right.
Hey.
Are you available?
I am.
Okay, awesome.
This is talking from experience. Dog workshops are fun.
Yay.
Okay. Number 2. 667. 67. Oh.
And that's to clarify that if the person that is,
Yes,
if
if
the
the person
person can't come.
right, something should happen. John.
I hope nothing happens,
Okay.
John. I'm pulling for you,
We have
dude.
a very similar number.
We'll see, though. You never know.
69 is our,
A lot could happen.
our third backup person. Okay. And let's pick another one.
Yep.
What a chain of bad luck.
652. 652? Okay,
Be safe, John. Be safe.